She said, but the only thing is I have a lot of people in my world. I have bio family, I have foster family, I have all these people. But the reality is I have nowhere to go home for Christmas. Fostering teenagers, why you should try it. If you haven't heard, fostering teenagers kind of gets a bad rap. You may only hear about horrific things that happen in foster care with teens, but this video is to encourage you and let you know that not all teenagers are the same, and fostering teens can be actually really enjoyable and it can be super fulfilling. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you get a chance to subscribe below. When you do, leave a comment and I will make sure to respond to you. And if you are really into foster care or foster and adoption, this is the place for you. It is all things educational to really share our experience as a foster family of over 16 years. Also, make sure to stay to the end for my final thoughts, where I will share a story about a remarkable young woman. So this past week, really late at night, it was probably 8 o'clock at night, we got a call for a teenager. We are still licensed, even though we've adopted 4 girls from foster care. And this in particular call, it gripped my heart. I knew that this child would go to a group home or she would go to a hotel if we didn't take her. And we were uniquely designed, our family, to be able to foster this child. She didn't speak English, and our family is, my husband's Spanish speaking, and we knew that it would be a good fit. And so we said yes. And this foster experience was actually exceptional. She was an amazing young woman, just humble and kind and sweet. And so it really has flipped my perspective. We've taken other older kids as well and have had a really good experience. And so I really, again, just want to break this stigma that fostering teenagers is always bad. According to datacenter.kidscount.org, 36% of kids who are in foster care are 11 years or older. That's a big percentage of older kids that do need happy and healthy families that will foster them. And while recently in the foster care system, there has been a huge push to keep kids with biological family members. It is called Families First. That is not really what's happening with older kids. So kids who are 13 and older are not finding families to go to. And so their potential for a foster family, whether it's a family first family or a foster family, has been extremely slowed. They do not really have great options. And worse yet, kids who are of color, specifically kids who are of African American descent, tend to be with family even at a smaller, decreased rate. This specifically really just breaks my heart. We have an African American daughter, and she is the most amazing young woman you would ever find. And I can't imagine someone saying, I don't want to foster that child simply because of the color of their skin. And yet the reality is kids who are of color, specifically Black or African American, are at the smallest rate to be able to go with family members, unlike kids who are Caucasian or even kids maybe that are Hispanic or who are of another ethnicity. Ann E. Casey's Foundation in 2020 reported these statistics, as well as the Center for State Welfare Data in 2021. I could give you statistic after statistics, but the reality is I think you understand that teenagers are not able to be in foster families or to maintain placement as well as other kids who are maybe younger and who are entering the foster care system. So why should you foster teenagers? Here's an example. I think that we tend to clump teenagers together. We tend to think that every child that's in foster care is maybe a child that is purposefully and intentionally trying to destroy their foster family, trying to harm other people or harm themselves. But in reality, think about when you were a kid. Can you think of specific faces of kids that potentially could have been in foster care, or maybe could have gone in foster care, that you knew maybe they weren't dressed well, maybe they didn't smell well, maybe they came from a disruptive family, or you could tell that they had marks on them, and maybe they were kids that potentially today would have entered the foster care system. Now ask yourself, were those kids the bad kids? Were they the ones that were tearing up the classroom and screaming and yelling and disrupting everything? Or were they the quiet kids? Or maybe the awkward kids? Or maybe the kids that were socially uncomfortable, or maybe not as socially skilled as other kids? I know from my childhood, I remember two specific kids that fall into these scenarios. One of them was a girl that it was known that her mom was a prostitute. She dressed a little funny, didn't always match, and she was a little quirky and didn't quite fit in with the other kids. Some of the kids would even make fun of her because they said, "Your mom's a prostitute," and they would go on and tease her. Today, that child would have been removed if the foster system would have stepped in, and she would have been going to foster care. Was she disruptive? No. Was she angry or violent? No. She was just a typical kid who never had structure in the family that maybe somebody else did. There was another boy, and he was extremely withdrawn. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't look up. He had long hair that kind of came over his eyes. He needed a really good trimming, and often he didn't really smell super great. And you could tell he hadn't taken a bath. He didn't have a really great a list of social skills or maybe academic skills. And today I could see that potentially that would be a child that would have entered the foster care system. Again, was he aggressive? No. Was he dangerous? No. And so think about the kids in your world growing up, the ones that potentially would enter the foster care system. And I think we need to separate that there are some kids who are disruptive and aggressive, and maybe they are just out of control because of their circumstances at home. But the reality is a lot of those kids, they end up going to group homes. They won't go into a foster home. They won't join a family. Social services, they know which kids are going to adapt in a family and which ones aren't. And often they will not put you at risk if there's a child that would not be a good fit. And even if you took a child that you felt was beyond your scope or ability, you don't have to keep a child in your home. And although it's not ideal to move children, there are options, there are supports and services for those families who do take and foster teenagers. And as we think about fostering teenagers, I want you to consider something. Kids who are teenagers that maybe they just got thrown into foster care or they've been in the system for a while. I think it's really important, and I think we forget this, that kids are in foster care not due to something that they have done. If they've committed a crime, they will go to the Denny Youth Center. They will go into some kind of protective custody. They will not go into a foster care system. Kids go into foster care because of the choices that their biological families have created and put them in. These kids tend to feel out of control. They tend to be really honestly victims to the circumstances that they were born or they were raised in. And so as we come in and consider taking foster teens, I think it's so important to remember this, that the reason these kids are in foster care is due to no fault of their own. And so to look at them with grace and try to put yourself in their shoes. And lastly, before I share my final thoughts, I wanted to share this with you, that when we are in a foster community or maybe an adoptive community, we often hear stories, right? I remember one woman in front of me at church sharing a horrific story, really the week that I brought home an older foster teen. And it just kind of threw me for a loop. She was telling these wild stories, and explaining these awful things, and it honestly was not helpful. And so I think as foster parents, we can kind of maybe grab a hold of these things. We can live in fear and say, we don't want that in our home, or we don't want to be out of control, or we won't know what to do, or maybe it just feels scary to us. But I know another woman that she fostered younger kids. She worked really hard. She adopted a boy and then took in younger kids, and it just wasn't a good fit. And it wasn't until she took in an older foster teen that she realized what a blessing having an older teen in her home actually was. And so as you watch this video, I want to encourage you to not listen to anyone else's stories. I'm sure you know by now that foster care is very unique, that you could have 10 of the same scenario, and yet each story is really individualized. Each child is, and to not clump teenagers or any kid into the same box, because you may be the perfect fit for a specific teen and not even know it until they come into your home and you decide to live bold, live brave, and step out and say yes to that particular child. And these are my final thoughts. When I first started fostering 16 years ago, I had this teeny tiny box of what I thought I wanted the children to come in my home to be. And what I've realized over the years is that the more that I've done this, nothing else has changed, really. Our family, even our experience, maybe has changed a little, but what has changed is my mindset, my knowing and understanding that we get equipped. As kids come into our home, God gives us what we need. We don't need to have it all together. We don't need to read every single book there is before we foster, because there is something about the moment a child walks into your door, they look at you and they depend on you to keep them safe and to love them and to feed them and to show them what family looks like. And really, that's something we can't do until we are put in that situation to show love and kindness to the child that walks through our door. So recently I was at like a trauma center for one of the kids that were in my care, and there was a social worker there, and she was exceptional. She was an old foster child. She was now older. She had studied for her PhD. She was just incredible. She had so much wealth of information because she had been in foster care and I hadn't. And so I just listened and I gleaned from this woman. And what I realized, and she shared kind of multiple times, she kept on saying, I aged out of foster care. I aged out. And for those of you that don't know what that means that she went through the whole foster system and she never got adopted. She shared that she had been successful. She had worked hard. She had beat the odds. She not only got a bachelor's degree or a master's, here she was on her PhD. I mean, this was a woman that was using her gifts to help other kids, and she was incredible. But the one thing that she said to me that really impacted me, she said, but the only thing is I have a lot of people in my world. I have bio family, I have foster family, I have all these people. But the reality is I have nowhere to go home for Christmas. And here was a successful woman that had fought and discovered who she is and grew and became this incredible asset to society and to other foster kids. And yet she had nowhere to call home. And so I encourage you, as you consider fostering teenagers, that you would also consider adoption, because these kids, again, are incredible. If there's someone in your world that maybe they're a neighbor or a family member that is going into foster care or just came into foster care, I would encourage you to ask more questions. You don't need to jump all in, but just take little baby steps. Maybe contact the social worker, ask questions, learn about who they are and what their needs are. And maybe you might find that your family, your home is a good fit for another foster teen, because the reality is no one should not have a place to go home for Christmas. Thank you so much for watching. I encourage you again to subscribe and check out my other videos. You also can check out A-Team Adventures. It's at the bottom of this page if you want to learn more about my family. And remember, go out, live bold, be brave, and we will see you next time.